Hello there. All right, my friends, welcome back in to the Galactic Archives. It has been a minute. It's been just about 2 months actually since I last streamed. I think my last stream was actually Christmas Eve. So yeah, 2 days shy of 2 months. For those who are not aware, I was having some massive computer issues. I had various parts fail, so it was taking some time to get replacement parts. As you might be aware, certain components are really expensive right now, so that was slowing things down a bit. But we are back, and so far everything seems to be working. As I was just saying in chat, I will have to reassign some Stream Deck buttons, but that's really minor in the grand scheme of things, considering everything that happened in the last 2 months. So yes, I am super excited to be back. Welcome in to Sniper and Wraith and Zenny. Good to see all of you. And I am getting back into the groove, as it were. Yes. Thank you very much for the love, to Sniper. And oh, Wraith, by the way, thank you for that 10 stream streak. Much appreciated, sir. All right. Let me get things moved around in here. Thank you, Wraith. And could you also get Zenny as well, if you don't mind? Okay. Wraith doesn't stream. That's funny. But thank you. I appreciate that. All right, let's get into our official evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Galactic Archives and our writing workshop series. It's been a while. This is a calm space where we explore how stories breathe and how emotional movement happens beneath the surface. If you're new here tonight, I'm glad you found your way in. These workshops are designed as quiet spaces to examine storytelling craft through long-form examples, particularly how emotional narratives breathe across chapters rather than within single scenes. You don't need to speak up to participate. Listening counts. Thinking counts. Quietly taking notes while you work on your own writing absolutely counts. Tonight, we're moving into Workshop 4, and the focus shifts slightly from recovery into something more subtle, the craft of emotional continuity and subtext. We're working from chapters 13 and 14 of Steps into the Past, where the external stakes remain relatively still, but the emotional landscape keeps changing beneath the surface. What makes these chapters interesting isn't dramatic action. It's what changes quietly. How characters stand near one another, how routines begin to return, how care is shown through observation instead of declarations, and how relationships shift without anyone naming the shift aloud. These chapters ask a very writerly question. How do you show emotional movement when nobody is saying what they actually feel? That's what we're going to dig into tonight. And I'm going to pause here for just a second. For anybody who might be new, my name is Meshla. I'm a long-form storyteller and lore creator, and your resident archivist in the archives. So if you're new, welcome. When we talk about emotional continuity, we're talking about the thread that carries the feeling forward across scenes. Not repetition, not re-explaining trauma or conflict. I've seen a lot of stories do that. But subtle evolution. In chapter 13, Marin is still fragile, physically and emotionally, and much of the tension comes from others quietly adjusting around her. Jared watches her more closely. Greer changes how he intervenes. Callista shifts from instruction to gentle permission. The care is visible mostly through behavior, not what is said or not said. By chapter 14, something new appears. Small acts of routine begin returning. Marin dresses herself carefully. She chooses to move again. Others give her space while remaining present. The world hasn't changed dramatically, but her relationship to it has begun to shift. This is the beginning of emotional continuity. It's the quiet accumulation of small choices that tell the reader something is changing, even if no one says it out loud. I'm going to pause here and grab a drink of water, because I'm going to be doing a lot of talking. As always, if anything we're talking about here tonight sparks inspiration or questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat, and I will do my best to answer them. I am by no means an expert, but I do like to share what I do know and what I have personally experienced. A lot of stories handle emotional beats as isolated moments, big scenes, big feelings, and then they move on. But readers don't experience emotions that way. Characters shouldn't either. Emotional continuity creates believability, immersion, and trust. When a character goes through trauma or major change, the reader subconsciously expects to see echoes of that change in their posture, the pacing, their habits, their decision making, and even in their relationships. In these chapters, for example, Marin's return to movement is measured and cautious, a negotiation rather than a triumph. The scenes emphasize deliberate steps and small bodily decisions rather than dramatic declarations. That restraint tells us more than pages worth of explanation ever could. And what we're going to touch on next is something that I think is really important, because as a writer, the whole point of these workshops is to help you, whether you're a writer yourself or whether you deal with other genres or mediums. I'm hoping that it will help you kind of look at it a different way and kind of look at it more what's the word, more constructively, I suppose. I'm not sure that's the right word, but that's what I could come up with. Learning to write emotional continuity in your stories can unlock several other skills. You can evolve characters without resetting them. The character doesn't need to heal instantly. They carry their history and their wounds forward. You can deepen relationships quietly. Notice how Jared's support appears through proximity, his hovering hands, shared breathing, his silent presence, rather than overt or lengthy speeches. You can create momentum without action scenes. Readers keep turning pages because emotional movement is happening even when plot movement is actually minimal. And you avoid emotional whiplash. Nothing feels sudden because every shift has been prepared through subtle cues. Now, let's pair emotional continuity with tonight's second focus, subtext. Subtext is what characters communicate without saying things directly, and these two chapters are chock full of it. Greer's silent nod instead of a lecture, Jared's hands hovering but not touching, offering support without forcing it, and Callista and Jared exchanging silent understanding about Marin's limits. The words are minimal, the meaning is far from it. This is relational storytelling happening beneath the dialogue, or in this case, the lack of it. Another drink of water here. Also, let me know if the music is too loud, not loud enough, if I need to adjust volumes. I am in the middle of having to fix everything because things were weird. So, let me know. Let's begin by framing our case study. As we move into our primary case study, I want you to watch for 3 things. 1. Small behavioral changes. What is done differently than before in previous chapters? 2. Re-entry into routines. What ordinary actions begin to return? And 3. Silent relational shifts. Who adjusts their behavior first? There we go. These chapters are not about dramatic recovery. They're about the first signs of stability returning. And those signs are easy to miss if you only look for explicit emotional statement. Here's a gentle question for you to think about. And there's no need to answer unless you want to. In your own writing or reading, how do you currently show that a character has changed without them having to explain it? Just think about that for a second and notice what comes to mind. From here, we'll move into the primary case study. A close reading of chapters 13 and 14 focused on the following things: how routine returns scene by scene, the micro adjustments in Jared, Greer, and Callista's behavior, and how emotional continuity is built through physical actions rather than dialogue itself. Alright. For this case study, we're going to slow down and stay very close to the text of chapters 13 and 14. Rather than looking for dramatic turning points, we're going to track small movements. The kind of changes that many writers instinctively make but don't always recognize as deliberate parts of the craft. These chapters are set during early recovery and quiet reintegration. The danger hasn't vanished, but the immediate crisis has passed. That creates a very specific emotional challenge. How do you show progress without suggesting complete healing? The answer is emotional continuity. The first way to do so is small behavioral changes as narrative signals. One of the first things we'll notice in these chapters, and if you were here when I was reading those chapters on stream, you might remember some of this. One of the first things we'll notice is how behavior shifts in small increments rather than through clear declarations. Marin says she's fine more than once, but the narrative shows us otherwise through physical cues, her hesitation, her slow movement, and the way she anchors herself with familiar objects. This is important. The chapter never announces she's beginning to recover. Instead, this is implied through accepting food rather than resisting, allowing herself to be guided, and choosing to stay rather than withdraw from the others. These small actions become markers of progress. As writers, can be a somewhat advanced technique. You show change through behavioral contrast. What did she do before? What does she allow now? Every slight increase in cooperation or openness reads as emotional movement because the baseline has been established earlier in the story. Behavioral shifts are strongest when they are subtle enough to feel natural, repeated enough to be noticeable, and never announced explicitly. The reader can feel the change before they consciously identify. If you're a writer, whether you're working on a novel or a fanfiction, what small behavior could show growth in your own character without needing dialogue to explain it? I can think of a few instances for Marin. And 2, re-entry into routine without resetting the character. This is really important. This is a key strength of these chapters and how routine begins to reappear. Marin puts on her boots. She begins moving through the estate again. She's eating in the kitchen. She's attempting her familiar training routines. Routine is often misunderstood in writing. Some writers fear that it can stall momentum. In reality, routine can be a powerful storytelling device when used correctly. Here, routine signals life is beginning to continue, but the character isn't unchanged. It could be. It could be. In this particular context, yeah, we're specifically looking at chapters 13 and 14. But yes, I would say that this process could be applied to character growth and maturity as the character continues through their journey. I think that that could definitely apply. That's an excellent question, Ray. Notice that every routine action is deliberate. Lacing her boots takes effort. Standing requires adjustment and some support. And walking is measured rather than effortless. The routine returns, but the relationship to it has changed. That distinction preserves the emotional continuity. When writing re-entry into routine in your story, don't write the routine as normalcy suddenly restored. Write routine as a negotiation. The character remembers how things used to feel, and they notice the differences. Ooh, here's something for you to think about, Wraith, and anyone else who's working on writing. Is there a routine action your character could attempt that reveals how much has changed since they last did that? Think about that for a second. If it helps, I can try and put these questions in chat if you want. Whatever works for you guys. I want to make this as low stress as possible. I can definitely try putting these in the chat if you think that would be better. Up to you guys. And 3. Jared's watchfulness. Subtext through presence. Jared's role in these 2 chapters is almost entirely defined by restraint. He watches. He adjusts his pace. He offers support before it's requested. And he rarely pushes. One particularly strong example is how he offers a hand and simply waits. The subtext here is powerful. I see your struggle. I trust you to decide, and I'm here regardless of your choice. None of this is spoken out loud or outright. Subtext works because the relationship history already exists. The reader understands the meaning behind the gesture. This is a crucial craft lesson. Subtext relies on accumulated context. Without prior emotional groundwork, silence can feel empty. With it, silence becomes meaningful. And here's a few things to think about if you're writing subtextual support, so wordless support, things that people are doing but not necessarily saying. When writing subtextual support, reduce your dialogue, increase the positioning, maybe they offer a hand of support without saying anything, and focus on proximity and pacing. Where a character stands can carry more emotional information than what they say. Ooh. Who in your stories shows care more through presence than through what they say? 4. Greer's perimeter. Emotional continuity through consistency. This is very Greer. Greer's role is fascinating to me because his behavior changes very little outwardly, and that consistency itself becomes emotional continuity. He observes, he assesses, and he doesn't intervene unless necessary. For those who are not aware, Greer is a Master Sergeant in the Katani Marines, so he's very no-nonsense. Yes. Just for some context for you guys. Because readers, or listeners in my case, already know his vigilance, Even small adjustments, such as a softened exhale, a brief nod, can communicate enormous emotional meaning without him having to say anything. This is an important lesson. Not every character must change visibly to support emotional progression. Sometimes stability around the protagonist allows the protagonist's change to stand out. We have an ad starting in just under 5 minutes, my friends. Support characters can provide emotional continuity by maintaining consistent behavior. Greer is very good at this. Allowing subtle shifts to carry weight. Yeah, Greer does this a lot. Reinforcing safety without saying anything about it aloud. Do you have a character whose steadiness helps reveal change in other characters? I definitely do in my stories. And 5. Callista's care. Subtext through touch and permission. Callista introduces another dimension, physical care that communicates emotional permission. She doesn't command Marin to rest, she guides gently, framing rest as acceptable rather than required. This changes the relationship dynamic. Earlier chapters positioned survival as urgent and reactive. Here, care becomes intentional and calm. The subtext says, you don't have to prove anything right now, and you're allowed to be vulnerable. Again, this is rarely stated directly or aloud. Instead, it appears through tone, pacing, repeated gestures like applying salve, and quiet verbal framing. Subtext grows stronger when dialogue supports actions instead of explaining emotion. The emotional meaning will sit beneath the words. How might a nurturing gesture in your story communicate more than dialogue ever could? By the way, this is not an ad for Good and Gather, it's just the water I have. 6. Silent relational shifts. Across chapters 13 and 14, relationships shift almost invisibly. Examples include Marin allowing herself to lean physically or emotionally on others, Jared moving from constant guarding to collaborative pacing, Greer monitoring Marin without crowding her, and Callista offering care without urgency. The important thing is that nobody announces the change. No one says, we're closer now, or she trusts us again. The reader infers this through repeated interactions. This is emotional continuity at its most effective. I can't English today. Relational shifts work best in story when repeated interactions evolve slightly, dialogue stays consistent while behavior changes, and readers are allowed to connect the dots for themselves. What quiet relational shift might already be happening in your current story that you haven't named yet? One second. Alright. And 7. The role of environment and continuity. Nogus isn't just the setting. It's honestly an emotional stabilizer. The mountain imagery, the quiet halls, the hearth light. These elements remain consistent across many scenes, giving readers a grounded emotional baseline. Because the environment stays steady, subtle character changes become more visible. This is a powerful structural choice. If everything changed at once, setting, relationships, tone, readers lose the ability to perceive nuanced emotional shifts. I'm gonna pause there because we have an ad starting in about 20 seconds and I don't want to run into the ad. So I'm gonna pause there. We're gonna have a minute and a half ad. Take advantage of that. Go get yourself a snack, a drink of water, have a stretch. All of the important self-care things. I'll see you back here in a minute and a half. Alright, my friends, we are back from our ad break. I was attempting to fix my stream deck buttons in the meantime. Well, we'll fix that later, I guess. And we are back. Okay. Here's a craft observation. Use stable environments to highlight unstable emotions, or vice versa, but not both at the same time. Does your current setting for your story support emotional continuity, or does it reset tone too often? And 8. What these chapters quietly refuse to do. This may be the most important lesson from these chapters. These chapters refuse to resolve tension completely. Marin improves, but she remains fragile. Connections deepen, but uncertainty remains. And routine returns, but the past still lingers. This refusal to over-resolve keeps emotional continuity intact. Progress exists, but it isn't final. Emotional continuity requires unfinished edges. If every scene resolves emotion fully, growth begins to feel artificial. Are you allowing your characters to carry unresolved feelings forward from scene to scene? That's a heavy question. Like, definitely something to think about. Wait 1 second while I check something. Okay. Double checking something, that's all. We've now looked closely at how chapters 13 and 14 build emotional continuity through small behavioral changes, re-entry into routine, nonverbal support, consistent character roles, and silent shifts in relationships. Next, we'll widen the lens. In the next section, we'll explore secondary examples, comparing these techniques with other moments across the arc, and examining how emotional continuity scales beyond recovery scenes. After spending time inside chapters 13 and 14, it helps to pull back and look at how these same techniques appear elsewhere in the arc. This matters because emotional continuity is not a chapter-level skill. It's a story-level practice. When done well, readers feel that characters are living through time rather than resetting between scenes. So in this section, we'll look at where similar emotional patterns appear elsewhere, and what that tells us about how to sustain subtext across longer narratives. I need some water, goodness. There we go. 1. Emotional continuity across recovery phases. In earlier chapters, tension often sits close to fear or survival. Later chapters shift towards preparation, duty, or even uncertainty, but emotional threads remain intact. For example, in chapter 13, Marin's movement is cautious and inward focused. In later sections of the arc, that caution evolves into vigilance rather than vulnerability. The behavior changes, but the emotional origin remains the same. This is what continuity looks like across an arc. The emotional state transforms rather than disappears. Readers sense growth because they can trace the line from one phase to the next. Think of emotional continuity as a river. The shape changes, the speed may change, and the direction shifts, but it is still the same water. If the emotional thread feels disconnected, readers lose their orientation to the story. Can you trace a single emotional thread through more than one chapter in your own work? Think about that for a second. It's not necessarily easy either. 2. Subtext before and after conflict. Another useful comparison is how subtext behaves before conflict versus after it. In chapters 13 and 14, subtext carries care, concern, hesitation, and even adjustment. In higher pressure chapters elsewhere in Steps into the Past, subtext often carries strategy, warning, restraint, or even unspoken urgency. The mechanics stay the same. There are fewer explicit statements. There's a heavier reliance on gesture and trust in the reader to interpret what's going on. Only the emotional purpose changes. This teaches us an important lesson. Subtext isn't tied to mood. It is tied to relationship awareness. Whenever characters understand more than they say, subtext emerges. If two characters share history, you can reduce dialogue and increase meaning. Silence then becomes information. And for anybody who's been hanging around while I've been reading Steps into the Past, you will see that happen a lot. a lot. Looking at you, Veil Code. Where do your characters understand something about each other that they don't say aloud? That happens a lot for Marin. A lot. And 3, continuity through repeated behaviors. A powerful technique seen across Steps into the Past is the repetition of small behaviors with slight evolution. For example, a character standing watch in multiple chapters, a hand hovering before contact, and a repeated routine that slowly changes tone. Readers may not consciously notice these repetitions, but emotionally, they feel them. In chapters 13 and 14, Jared's watchfulness is protective. Later, similar watchfulness may shift toward partnership or trust. The behavior repeats, but the meaning of it evolves. That evolution is emotional continuity. Repetition without change can feel stagnant. Repetition with subtle variation can bring something to life. Is there a small gesture or habit you could repeat in your story to show gradual change over time? I can think of one for Marin. Actually, a few. 4. Emotional continuity across different relationships. Not every relationship evolves at the same speed. This is something these chapters handle extremely well. For example, Marin and Jared shift toward quiet closeness. Marin and Greer remain structured and observational, and Marin and Callista lean into nurturing steadiness. Each relationship reflects a different emotional tempo. This prevents monotony. If every relationship changes simultaneously, scenes begin to lose texture. Instead, continuity emerges through this contrast. When you're writing and crafting your stories, ask yourself, which relationship changes first, which changes last, and which remains stable, if any of them? Those differences can help create realism to what's going on. Do your relationships in your stories evolve at different speeds, or all at once? And 5. Environment as emotional anchor across the arc. Earlier we discussed Tanagas as a container for emotion. Here's the broader comparison. Across Steps into the Past, location often signals emotional state. Open spaces suggest vulnerability or exposure. Enclosed spaces suggest safety or control. Transitional spaces, such as corridors, transports, often hold uncertainty. Chapters 13 and 14 keep the setting stable, which allows subtle emotional changes to stand out. Later chapters may shift location to signal new emotional phases. This balance between environmental stability and change helps the readers track internal progression without explicit explanation. Changing location can reset the emotional tone. Keeping the location steady can highlight emotional growth. You want to use this intentionally and not do it abruptly either. That could be very jarring. Could keeping your character in the same location longer Help reveal emotional change more clearly? I don't know. Marin's been at home a few chapters now. We'll see. We'll see where that goes. And 6. Emotional continuity versus emotional repetition. This distinction matters a great deal. Emotional repetition sounds like she was still afraid, or he was still worried. Emotional continuity looks like different behaviors emerging from the same emotional source. In chapters 13 and 14, fear doesn't repeat as dialogue. Instead, it appears as pacing differences, watchful pauses, and cautious physical decisions. That keeps the emotional experience fresh while maintaining consistency for the reader. Continuity asks, how does this emotion look now compared to before? That's a really important question to consider. Is your character expressing the same emotion in new ways as their story progresses? Let me know. And 7. Silent changes in group dynamics. Another subtle example appears in group scenes. Early in a story, group interactions often feel structured or formal. As emotional continuity builds, groups begin moving together more fluidly. Fewer instructions are needed. There's more implicit coordination and a shared understanding of limits. In chapters 13 and 14, this appears through spacing and timing rather than dialogue. The group adapts around Marin without even discussing it. That adaptation itself shows emotional movement. Group dynamics are a powerful way to show emotional continuity without internal monologue. Readers observe the system changing. Has the way your character move around each other changed since the beginning of your story? I know it definitely has for Marin. In a lot of ways. We've now explored how emotional continuity and subtext appear within these chapters, across other parts of the arc, and in different relational and environmental contexts. Next, we'll shift from analysis into some application, where I'll kind of break down different parts of the story. In the next section, we'll talk about how to create emotional continuity intentionally, how to write subtext without confusing your reader. That can happen. Common pitfalls, and how to adapt these techniques across genres. Thank you, Saribot. Part 4. Applied Craft. Give me 2 seconds while I do something. Up until now, we've been observing how emotional continuity and subtext operate in chapters 13 and 14. Now, we shift to the question most writers eventually ask. How do I do this intentionally? Because emotional continuity often feels invisible when it's working well. Many writers think it's something that just happens if the characters are strong enough. But it can be crafted deliberately. The key is understanding what you are tracking across scenes and what you are allowing to change quietly over time. 1. Track emotional momentum, not emotional states. A common mistake is trying to label emotions scene by scene. Writers will ask themselves, is my character sad here? Are they hopeful? Is this a healing moment? But emotional continuity isn't about isolated states, it's about momentum. Think of it this way. Instead of asking what the character feels, ask, Are they moving toward openness or away from it? Are they expanding or retreating? Are they choosing connection or avoidance? In chapters 13 and 14, Marin's emotional movement is subtle but directional. She accepts presence more readily. Her routines begin to return, and her resistance softens without completely disappearing. These are markers of momentum. Here's a technique for you to think about and practice if you like. After drafting a scene, write one short note for yourself. At the end of this scene, the character is slightly more blank than before. This can help you track progression without over-defining emotions. Is your character moving emotionally in a direction, even if the movement is very small? 2. Continuity without repetition. Writers often fear that maintaining continuity means repeating information, but it doesn't. Repetition says the same words, the same emotional beats, and the same reactions, whereas continuity says the same emotional roots expressed in different ways. For example, a character who is still uncertain might hesitate in one scene, ask quieter questions in another, and stand farther back in a group later on. The emotion remains consistent, the expression of it evolves. In chapters 13 and 14, this appears through changing behavior rather than repeated internal narration. The reader feels continuity without feeling stuck. When revising, highlight scenes where the same emotion appears. Ask yourself, does this look different than the last time this emotion appeared? Has the expression evolved even slightly? If not, adjust the behavior, not necessarily the dialogue around it. Just 1 second. Okay. How might your character show the same feeling differently in 2 separate scenes? That can take some practice to think about. 3. Writing subtext without confusing your reader. This is really important. A lot of stories that I've read can actually kind of assume that the reader knows more than they do. So... I mean... No? We might have to look at that one. Subtext often requires trust, but not mystery for its own sake. A useful rule. Readers must understand that something is being communicated, even if they don't fully know what that is. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of stories assume that the reader knows more than they do, or that they should know more than they do. Which, that's, yeah. In chapters 13 and 14, the reader understands that care and concern are present because the context is established. There's shared history, prior danger, and consistent behavioral cues. Without this groundwork, silence feels empty rather than meaningful. Wait 2 seconds. Okay. When writing subtextual scenes, make sure at least one of these is clear. A shared context, visible emotional stakes, recognizable gestures, looking at you, Velcode again, consistent relational dynamics. Subtext works best when readers feel invited into the meaning rather than locked out of it. That's one of the reasons why, if you're actually reading the chapters and as I'm reading them, I have actually included explanations of the different, um, like manual file code and like the haptic pulse code and that kind of stuff for the reader's benefit, so that they understand what it means. I mean, like I understand most of it, but I try to think about the reader. Ooh, that's a great question. We have an ad starting in just under 5 minutes, by the way. 4. Non-verbal emotional cues that carry weight. Subtext frequently lives in eye contact or its absence, adjustments to pacing, offered but unaccepted touch, positioning within a room, or who initiates movement first. In chapters 13 and 14, small nonverbal shifts tell us everything. Jared giving space rather than hovering, Marin choosing proximity rather than isolation, and Greer remaining observant without interruption. These cues create relational meaning without the use of dialogue. During revision, ask yourself, if I removed all dialogue from this scene, would the emotional intent still be visible? If the answer is no, consider strengthening the following: movement descriptions, pauses, or even physical orientation. What is one non-verbal cue your characters use that says more than their words, if they use words at all, in this particular scene? Okay. 5. Silent changes in relational dynamic. Relationships rarely change in dramatic moments themselves. More often, they change through repeated small decisions. Who speaks first? Who waits? Who assumes responsibility? And who allows themselves to be vulnerable? In these chapters, relational shifts occur because characters subtly adjust to Marin's pace. No one announces this change, but this mirrors real human interactions. Sorry, didn't want to be coughing into the mic. I have a little bit of congestion, so it's messing with my voice. Alright, that's a little better. Track relational dynamics like this. And you can use these techniques or leave them or use parts of them. This is by no means me telling you how to write. It's just the ways that I have found that work for me. So you can track your relational dynamics like this. Who leads the interaction early in the story? Who leads it now? Has that changed quietly throughout the story? Even small shifts can signal growth. Ooh. Has leadership or emotional weight shifted quietly between your characters over time? I don't know, right? I think that it has a little bit with yours. I know it has with mine. We have a minute and a half. So I'm gonna read some of these. Okay. Yeah. 6. Common pitfalls. Let's talk about where emotional continuity can often break in a story. Pitfall 1. Emotional reset. Characters behave as though previous scenes never happened. The way to fix that is to carry small effects forward. Fatigue, hesitation, confidence, or caution. Pitfall 2, over explanation. This is something that I'm always worried that I do in my stories. So it's something that I'm constantly fighting myself on. Writers explain emotions repeatedly out of fear readers won't understand. But the way to fix that? Trust behavior and context, and trust your reader. I'm gonna stop there because we have an ad starting in about 10 seconds. So I will pause there, and I will see you guys in a minute and a half. And hey, look at that, my buttons work. Yay! Welcome back from the ad break, my friends. Alright. So we were talking about some common pitfalls. Ah, here we go. Pitfall 3. Sudden emotional leaps. A character changes too quickly without transitional beats. To explain it, the way to fix that is to insert micro moments of adjustment. You'll see a lot of that actually with Marin as she's kind of readjusting to being up and around and getting back into her normal routines. You'll see that, like she changes how she moves and all that kind of stuff. Pitfall 4. Letting dialogue do all the work. If every emotional shift is spoken aloud, the subtext completely disappears. And as you've seen as we kind of analyze these chapters, let the silences hold meaning. The silence itself can actually say a lot in a scene. Oh. Out of these 4 pitfalls, which of these feels most familiar to your own writing process? And if you guys would like to come talk to me afterwards or put some comments in chat, whichever is more comfortable for you, I am happy to assist however I can. Like I said, I'm by no means an expert or a professional. I do this for fun, and I'm sharing my knowledge also for fun. So, you're welcome. 7. Adapting emotional continuity across genres. This technique can work regardless of genre. In romance, it can be slow shifts in comfort and trust. In fantasy, it can be returning to rituals after upheaval. In science fiction, it could be changes in duty, protocol, or routines. In thriller stories, it can be tension maintained through watchfulness. And in slice of life stories, it could be subtle behavioral evolution over time. Genre merely changes the surface details. The underlying craft remains the same. Emotions evolve through repeated, recognizable cues. How does emotional continuity show up in the genre you write most often? I've done a lot of thinking about this, as you can tell. And number 8, the revision lens, the emotional thread pass. One of the most useful editing tools. Do an emotional thread pass. It can be in a single scene. It can be in a chapter as a whole. Read only for one relationship or one emotional arc. Ignore the plot entirely. Ask yourself. So this may actually work better scene by scene. Ask yourself, does each scene build slightly on the previous? Are shifts visible but not abrupt? And does the silence carry increasing meaning? This pass can often reveal missing transitions. If you followed one emotional thread through your story, would it feel continuous or fragmented? Oh. Oh, I'm actually kind of ahead of the curve here. Alright. Yeah, it can be tough if the story that of your own that you're referencing is one that you haven't touched in a while. I actually didn't really touch my stories during my 2-month break. I had a lot of other things going on, so I wasn't really able to delve into the writing as much as or the editing as much as I wanted to. But so this is kind of, it's actually helpful to me as well because it's kind of getting me back into that headspace. Right. So we are running slightly ahead of schedule, my friends. But we're going to transition now to our question and answer session or our guided discussion. Up to this point, we've covered how emotional continuity works, how subtext carries relationship changes, how some practical revision strategies, and common traps that weaken subtle storytelling. From here, we'll move into a guided discussion space. This isn't high pressure. It's just reflective prompts designed to help people connect their craft, this craft to their own work. Before we move into the final reflection, I want to create a little space for discussion. This part is intentionally gentle and low pressure. You don't need to have answers ready. This isn't a quiz. You don't really need to type anything at all if you don't want to. Sometimes listening to the questions is enough to spark something in your mind for later. And that counts just as much as participating in my book. Think of this as a quiet pause where we connect the craft ideas we've covered to real writing experiences. 1. When emotional change feels too subtle. One concern that many writers have is that their emotional shifts are too small. They worry that the readers won't notice. But often, what feels small to the writer reads clearly to the audience, because readers experience the story across time rather than inside the drafting process. A useful question to ask yourself is this: does the emotional direction feel consistent, even if the movement is quiet? If yes, you're likely doing enough. Readers don't need dramatic indicators every chapter. They need trustable progression. In chapters 13 and 14, the emotional shifts are tiny, but because they are consistent, they feel meaningful. Sorry. Have you ever worried a subtle moment wouldn't land, only to find your readers noticing it immediately? Oh yeah. All the time. I often I actually often feel that I'm over explaining things, but all right. 2. Subtext and reader trust. Another common concern is, how much should I explain? The short answer is, explain enough for clarity, but not so much that you remove the reader's discovery for themselves. Readers enjoy connecting emotional dots themselves. Subtext works because it invites the reader's participation. If every emotional beat is explicitly interpreted on the page, the readers lose that sense of engagement. In these chapters, the relationships are clear, even though very little is stated outright or spoken aloud, because context has already been built. That's the balance. Do you tend to trust readers to infer meaning, or do you find yourself explaining more than you planned? I've done a little bit of both, honestly. 3. Writing quiet connections without making them romantic. This is a line that I have been walking very, very carefully with Marin and Jared. In the original version of the story, they were romantically involved, and they still are to a point, but it's very low key. It's in the updated version of the story, their relationship actually has more to do with mutual trust and support. Chels, welcome in, lady. Wraith, if you have a second, can you give Chels a shout out, please? She is a fellow member of the Survivor Squad. Thank you, Disneypo. I appreciate you. And she does live music and gaming and is an all-around awesome, chill person who is just fantastic. So welcome in. Good to see you, ma'am. A nuanced point that often comes up in this kind of workshop. Oh, I am loving it, but I'm honestly like a little overwhelmed, but in a good way. So we are currently, for Chell's benefit, we are currently talking about emotional continuity and subtext in the context of my fanfictions. And the section that we're dealing with right now is... well, we're actually at the guided discussion portion. Oh. We're talking a little bit about writing quiet connections without making them romantic, which that can be a challenge. A nuanced point that often comes up in this kind of workshop. Quiet emotional continuity doesn't automatically equal romance. Support, care, vigilance, and shared silence can exist across many relationship types: friendships, mentorships, found family, comrades, and quiet trust built through survival. Chapters 13 and 14 show this very clearly. Different characters often care in different ways without collapsing into a single emotional category. Lord, sir, where have you been? Welcome in. Wow, everybody's showing up. Okay. Should I move back to starting at 7? Maybe I should. I don't know. I just decided to start early because then I don't have to keep changing the event times when the time changes. Oh yeah. Yeah, I know. I was watching the weather earlier today. It's nuts. He doesn't stream, but thank you. So yes, Blizzard prep is a thing. But yes, for those, I'll address that at the end of the stream, because you may notice that. Yeah, the Twitch profiles are funky. And mine took forever to update. Crazy. Okay. I'm gonna back up just a second for you guys. Chapters 13 and 14 show this clearly. Different characters offer care in different ways without collapsing into a single emotional category. This broadens relational realism. Frustrating fact? Oh, fascinating fact. Okay. What kind of quiet emotional bonds do you enjoy writing that aren't romantic? That's great. That's fabulous. Thanks, Lord. I needed a good laugh. Oh, thank you, Charles. Looking out for me, ma'am. Way to use those channel points. Flex. Alright. 4. When characters don't talk about their feelings. Who likes talking about their feelings? I mean, come on. Some writers worry that if characters don't discuss their emotions openly, readers will feel disconnected. But emotional honesty doesn't always require direct conversation. Sometimes honesty appears through showing up repeatedly, adjusting behavior, respecting one's boundaries, and remaining present, even in silence. The key is consistency. If behavior aligns with emotional stakes, readers understand. Thank you, Lord, for that reminder. Much appreciated. I know I'm always forgetting to do that myself. Tools. Oh my word. This is what happens when you guys tag me. Frosty Tools comes out swinging. Yes. Thank you, Wraith. Oh man. Shoulders are crunchy. Yes. Yeah, you guys can play with Frosty Tools by tagging me. Frosty Tools will come out swinging on occasion. Oh, thank you for that stretch, Wraith. Appreciate it. Do your characters tend to talk more openly, or do they communicate more through their actions? And that may depend on the particular character. If you have more than one character in a scene, yes. Uh-oh. Are we gonna have a fight on our hands? 5. Handling your own anxiety about quiet scenes. Let's name something that many writers experience. Quiet scenes can feel very vulnerable to write. There's no action to hide behind. There's no dramatic event carrying the momentum forward. You're asking the readers to stay because of emotional truth. That can feel risky. If this resonates with you, you're not doing anything wrong. It often means you're writing close to something honest. No, don't do that. Oh dear. Does writing quieter emotional scenes feel easier or harder than writing big dramatic ones? I don't know, I have a really hard time writing action scenes. They're just really tough. 6. Recognizing emotional continuity in revision. Sometimes writers don't see emotional continuity until they're revising or editing. You might discover gestures repeating unintentionally, relationship dynamics evolving naturally, or emotional beats connecting across chapters. This is normal. Continuity can emerge organically, then be strengthened deliberately later. Revision isn't fixing mistakes. It's clarifying what the story itself already knows. Ooh, here's a question for you, Wraith. Or anybody else who's a writer in the chat. Have you ever discovered a pattern in your writing you didn't realize you were creating? Yes. What's one idea from tonight that you'd like to sit with a little bit longer? There's no need to share unless you want to. Okay. As we move towards the end of our workshop, we're going to shift from discussion into reflection. Next, we'll gather the main ideas together and end with some light, low-pressure homework, which you can do or not. The kind you can return to whenever you're ready. Oh. There we go. The quiet movement between scenes. As we close our stream tonight, I want to return to a simple idea. Not all emotional change is dramatic. Some of the most meaningful shifts in storytelling happen quietly, between words, between gestures, between one routine and the next. Chapters 13 and 14 show us this beautifully. Nothing monumental happens on the surface, and yet Marin moves a little more confidently. Jared's watchfulness softens into partnership, and Greer's steadiness becomes a stable background rhythm. Callista's care shifts from urgency to permission. These changes aren't announced, they're simply there. And that's what emotional continuity does. It allows readers to feel that characters exist beyond single scenes, that they remember what happened yesterday and that tomorrow will grow from today. Subtext supports this by letting meaning live beneath the dialogue. What isn't said often carries the greatest weight. If there's one thing I hope you take from tonight, it's this. Emotional continuity is not about repeating feelings. It's about allowing those feelings to evolve quietly over time. You don't have to rush growth. You don't have to explain every shift. Sometimes your best writing happens when you trust the readers to notice what changes without being told. What small changes in your character might be visible to the reader before the character fully realizes it themselves? Alright. And as I said before, these homework assignments are entirely optional. It's just exercises to help you as a writer, or even if you're like analyzing a story kind of objectively, it might be helpful for you to kind of zero in on a couple of things. So here they are. These are invitations. They're not really assignments in the normal sense of the word. Take what helps, leave the rest. We have an ad starting in just under 5 minutes. 1. The emotional thread check. Choose one relationship in your current project or a story that you're reading. Write one sentence for each of 3 scenes. At the beginning of the scene, this relationship feels. At the end of the scene, it feels. Look for small directional changes. 2. The silent rewrite. Take a short emotional exchange and reduce the dialogue by about 1/3. Let gestures, pauses, or movement carry the missing meaning. Notice what changes in the scene after you do that. 3. One routine, 2 versions. Write a simple routine action twice. Once before a major emotional event and once after it. Let the difference reveal continuity. 4. The subtext question. Ask yourself, what is this character trying not to say right now? You don't need to answer it on the page. Just know it as the writer. Yes, always blue. 5. End before explanation. Choose a scene and stop 1 paragraph earlier than you normally would. End before reassurance or emotional summary. See what lingers with you from that scene. Which of these feels easiest to try? Not tonight, but someday when your writing feels quiet enough for it. Something to ponder. And like I said, these are entirely optional. It's just exercises that I felt might be helpful for you if you're wanting to analyze a story or work on your own if you're in the process of writing. Is that like the answer to everything is 42? I don't know. All right. Thank you so much for being here tonight, my friends, whether you spoke in chat, wrote in chat, or simply lurked and listened. Workshops like this rely on shared attention more than shared words. Next time, we'll continue exploring craft from a new angle, but tonight, I hope you leave with permissions to trust subtlety. Stories don't only move through big moments, they move through accumulation, through small adjustments, through quiet continuity, and sometimes the most powerful thing a writer can do is to let the silence speak. Thank you for spending this time in the archives with me tonight. Quiet work still counts, and we'll continue the story next time. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm actually going to go ahead and end it there. I am not going to read out this evening as I'm still kind of tweaking some things on my end, but I do appreciate each and every one of you who was here, and to my mods, Lord, Wraith, and Sniper, thank you so much for being here and keeping the chat safe and being cheeky. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and I will see everybody here on Wednesday if you're available. Same time, 6 p.m. Eastern. And we are going to be reading chapters 16 and 17, if memory serves. I hope to see you all then, and hope you all have an awesome evening and a good night. Thank you, everybody. Have a great one.